Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, reporter Matt Craig. Matt, thanks for joining me.
Brittany, always a pleasure. Thank you.
It's an exciting weekend in Las Vegas. The UFC is hosting the first ever sporting event at the Sphere. So can you talk to us about how this historic event came to be?
Yeah, so obviously the Sphere opened last September with the U2 concerts, and since then they've had Dead and Company, and they've had this Postcards from Earth show that they've been showing every night. And so there's been interest around having live events at the Sphere, but logistically it is kind of an issue because of all the things that make the Sphere what it is. You know, this $160,000 or 1,000 square foot screen, and that makes it really, really hard to hang lights and hang cameras and what you would normally have, especially for a sporting event. And so, yeah, the UFC wants to be the first to do it. And in order to do that, they've had to solve for a lot of logistical problems that they didn't really know that existed when they first signed on to do it. But now, as they've put it together with the help of a very large investment, they're going to have a pretty knockout show this Saturday.
I want you to talk about the origin story of this specific event. Dana White was inspired when he visited the Sphere. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so Dana White said he never really planned to visit the Sphere when it opened, but then he got invited to go to the U2 concert by Tom Brady, and he said, when you get an invite from Tom Brady, you don't say no. So he went to see the U2 concert, and the thing he's repeated several times is when he went, he thought U2 is not the star of the show. The Sphere itself is the star of the show, and we've got to have a UFC event in here. And so he the next day called up their kind of head of creative, Craig Borsari, and he said, whatever your plans are, cancel them. You're coming to the Sphere. I want to tell you about this idea I have. And when Craig saw it, he was immediately like, this is going to be insanely difficult to do. But I think they were both kind of inspired to see what UFC could do in that space. And so they got to work planning it out.
Insanely difficult and insanely expensive. That came with a really heavy price tag. And Dana White, in really colorful language, told you he didn't really care about the cost. He wanted to make it happen. So what did that cost look like?
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny that when the TKO, which is the parent company for UFC, the CFO of TKO came to Craig and to Dana, and they said, what do you think this is going to cost to do? They estimated $8 million as the budget for this event. And the reason why they estimated that is because the most expensive pay-per-view event they had ever put on to date was a little over $2 million to put on. And so they said, $8 million is our guess, and we think, that's probably high, accounting for everything. And ultimately, when the lights go down this weekend on the event, they will have spent more than $20 million on it. So 10 times more expensive than any other event the UFC has ever put on. And part of that is again the way that the venue is set up. For example, normally at a UFC event, there would be kind of this rig that hangs over the octagon that you would have lights and cameras and mics attached to. But if you had that in the Sphere, it would completely block the big screen, which is obviously what makes the Sphere a magic. So they had to kind of come up with a makeshift sort of system of trusses behind the Sphere screen itself. Sometimes 300 feet in the air, and then they would, from those trusses, hang these lights that shine through the holes in the panels. So the actual LED panels of the Sphere have little holes in them for cooling, and these lights would have to shoot through them. And they had to figure out things like how far away do you put that light from the panel so that it doesn't melt it, for example, or during the action, can we open one of these panels up so that a camera can shoot through it? So there was just so many little problems and little challenges that they had to account for that made the cost of that show go up. But also, I would say even more than that, Dana White's ambition for this event. He wanted it to be this just grandiose blowout thing. He called it, his love letter to Mexico, since this event is on Mexican Independence Day. And so there's these 6 different 90-second short films that will show between fights, and they're just, it's. If you think about what Postcards from Earth is for the Sphere, these 16,000 by 16,000 pixel resolution movies. I mean, it's just crazy all the stuff they're trying to pack into it. There's going to be fog. There's going to be practical effects. There's going to be octagon girls with the costumes, elaborate makeup, and things like that. They're really, really, really pulling out all the stops for this event. So on top of the logistical problems, they really just kept adding and adding and adding to the stuff they wanted to show, and eventually the price tag totaled $20 million.
Huge price tag, a lot of logistical hurdles to go along with it. But Dana White replicated this sphere in a war room of sorts, and Forbes got the exclusive look inside. You were there. What was it like?
Yeah, so he said initially he couldn't. The information was on whiteboards and on printouts, and he couldn't really think through what it was going to be like to see this show at the Sphere. And so he, as he does with all his other ventures, he kind of creates these individual war rooms for where he sets the UFC fight cards, or even his new slap fighting venture. He's got a separate room for that. So initially he wanted to go out and rent a space and kind of build like a recreation of the Sphere. And the UFC folks, especially Craig Borsari, was like, maybe we think about using one of these spare closets at the UFC headquarters. And so they completely cleared it out, and they kind of set up all kinds of plans and schematics on the walls, and also storyboards of what the different short films would look like. And when I went in there, the only people that had been in there were the board of directors from TKO, and then a couple people that were working on the actual plans itself. And so we got to look inside there. We got to look at what the show is going to look like and how it came together. And the amount of time and the amount of thought they put into this thing is kind of nuts. I mean, Dana White said, realistically, this is something that you would want a year to prepare for. And they're trying to cram it together in about 4 months. So a lot of these guys have been eating, sleeping, breathing the Sphere really ever since then.
I think it's safe to say this is nothing like an event the UFC has put on before, but what can people expect at the Sphere, and do you think that's going to translate for people watching at home?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think even Dana White himself told me that he doesn't really know whether he's going to be able to translate it or not. But their plan to make that happen is basically they're going to have all the in-venue events on the giant screen. During the actual fights themselves, there'll be these like animated backdrops, kind of, and then obviously the films between fights and things like that. And then, there of course will be what they would normally shoot of the action with cameras. So you think about it, one crew for the in venue, one crew for the regular broadcast. Then they've hired another additional entire crew of people with, these kind of specialty wide angle cameras and lenses that are going to be shooting the screen itself, like from the widest possible angle. And they say, that helps to translate kind of the magnitude of the screen and the experience of seeing it. So when those short films play, they won't be just like taking the video and then exporting it over to your TV screen. It will be somebody filming the venue and filming the screen itself. And it's a little hard to imagine, but, you're supposed to be able to see the grandeur and the magnificence of the Sphere screen with these films that they put together. Like I said, even Dana himself, he doesn't know until he does it whether people are going to respond to it and whether the effect is going to hit.
Well, it's 10 times the amount the UFC has ever spent on an event, which is just an incredible, eye-popping number. Is the UFC expecting to make any of that back?
Yes, yes. I mean, they are expecting to have the highest gate revenue of any UFC event in history. They're expecting, very strong pay-per-view buys. They have, for the very first time, they have a naming sponsor for this event, which is a Saudi Arabian-backed Raidia season. So they will certainly make money. They're hoping that it's a profitable event. But Mark Shapiro, who is the president of TKO, like I said, the UFC parent company, told me that profitability is not the main concern with this event, because he really sees it as a brand builder. He thinks that this can kind of take UFC's reputation to the next level. And why that's important is because TKO, which is the company that merged the UFC and the WWE together at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, they make 2/3 of their revenue. So 2/3 of that company's revenue from media rights. So these are, the giant mega deals that UFC has with ESPN, or WWE just signed a global deal with Netflix. That's where they really make their money. And so if you think about it, you put two and two together, this event as a brand builder, and UFC has a deal coming up at the end of next year with negotiations starting at the beginning of next year on their next media deal. It makes total sense of why you would want to have sort of a big noisy event that gets the attention of potential media partners where they can really, really, really cash in.
And you made that point when writing about the timing of the event for Forbes. You wrote that it may be the right time for a noisy, attention-grabbing event. So do you have any indication of what the UFC's next media rights deal could be worth?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's speculation, and it's going to depend on a couple of factors. One being whether UFC is viewed as a must-have sport for these media rights holders, or whether it's a nice-to-have sport. And specifically with Disney and with ESPN, Disney being the parent company of ESPN, they just shelled out $2.3 billion a year for NBA rights, which is double what they were paying before. So obviously their budget, is used up to a certain extent. Do they feel like UFC is another one that they have to go out and spend? Because obviously the price is going to be expected to go up. Or are they going to let it slide? And if they let it slide, who else comes in? Warner Brothers Discovery just lost the NBA rights. Are they going to be hot to come in and try and snatch, UFC away? Amazon or Netflix, who just did a deal for the WWE rights. So who are the suitors going to be? That's going to be really, really important. And also, how much money is UFC going to be trying to get? If they wanted to maximize their money, they could try to divide the package up, kind of what we've seen with the NFL and the NBA, and have multiple partners, and you could get to a large total overall. However, from a brand perspective, it kind of makes more sense to have one, really strong partner that people will think, WWE is expected to get a brand bump from being on Netflix, because you turn on Netflix, you're scrolling through, and you try out UFC. Maybe you get sampling from folks who are not diehard fans. There's just a really nice brand synergy when you have one partner. So we don't know exactly. I spoke to one analyst at MoffettNathanson who thought that the amount that ESPN is paying on this current deal, which is $300 million, UFC is going to try to get at least $450 million a year in average annual value on their next deal. And it's really a matter of who ponies up. Mark Shapiro, of course, tells me he's got many potential suitors who are very, very interested in it. So we'll have to see when those negotiations get going next year.
Going back to Saturday's event, Dana White and the UFC really seem to be going into uncharted territory. When it comes to this, they put their blood, sweat, and tears into it for 4 months. So what does a successful event look like in Dana White's eyes?
Yeah, I mean, he's a bit of a perfectionist. So when I asked him that exact question, what his metric for success would be, he said he wants this event to run as seamlessly as it would, their average Saturday night event at UFC Apex, the one that they run basically every single weekend. And with all these moving parts and pieces and 450 people working, on this event, that's a lot to ask right there. However, again, he's a really ambitious guy. He likes to talk himself up and his product up. He also has the goal of winning, or not winning, being nominated. I guess he's humble enough to just say that, nominated for an Emmy, a Grammy, and an Oscar for this event. So the ambition is huge, and Dana White, thinks that if all things go according to plan, that is very, very achievable. He then wants to make an edited version of the show, again, if people like it and it goes over well, and sell that back to the Sphere as something that they can show the way that they've been showing postcards every night for a year. Have that be a kind of a permanent attraction in Las Vegas.
An Emmy, Grammy, and an Oscar. All he's missing is a Tony to get to EGOT status there. But Matt, Craig, per usual, thank you so much for your reporting. I appreciate the conversation.
Always a pleasure, Brittany.